June 17, 1944. 30 nautical miles west of the Azores, beneath a grey Atlantic sky, a German submarine commander made a routine decision that would seal his fate. Kapitänleutnant Helmut Sommer stood in the cramped control room of his Type 1C submarine, fingers resting on the navigation table's edge. Through the periscope, endless grey water stretched toward the horizon. His vessel had been on station for 3 weeks, assigned to weather reporting duties, transmitting atmospheric data back to headquarters every 6 hours. The radio operator looked up from his console, headphones pressed against his ears. The weather report was ready. Sommer nodded. The message had been prepared using a special short signal code system, condensed into just 25 encrypted characters. With an experienced operator, the transmission would take approximately 20 seconds. This was standard procedure, quick enough to avoid detection by British direction-finding equipment, which required nearly a minute to obtain a bearing on a radio signal, or so they believed. Within 10 minutes, aircraft from the American escort carrier would arrive overhead. Within 10 days, those same aircraft would locate the submarine again. Sommer and his crew had been taught that brief radio transmissions offered safety. They believed the ocean still provided concealment. They were operating with assumptions that had become obsolete months earlier, hunted by technology they did not know existed. The transformation of the Battle of the Atlantic would not announce itself with dramatic revelation. It arrived through accumulated encounters, through close escapes that should not have happened, through destroyers that appeared impossibly fast after routine transmissions. German submarine commanders spent the spring and summer of 1943 attempting to understand why the ocean no longer sheltered them, why Allied escorts seemed to anticipate their positions, why aircraft arrived within minutes of sending even the shortest signals. The realization came gradually, spreading through the submarine force like cold water seeping through a failing seal. By mid-1943, seasoned commanders returning from patrol would gather in officers' quarters, speaking in low voices about encounters they could not explain, escorts that changed course directly toward their position immediately after transmitting, aircraft that appeared from clear skies moments after surfacing to send mandatory reports. The mathematics of survival were changing, and no one at submarine headquarters in Paris seemed willing to acknowledge it. Between 1939 and 1945, German submarines sank approximately 3,000 Allied merchant vessels, totaling over 14 million gross registered tons. These losses nearly brought Britain to starvation, threatened the entire Allied war effort, and represented the closest Germany came to winning the war through purely naval means. But by May 1943, the balance had shifted irreversibly. That month, later known as Black May among submariners, 41 submarines were lost, a quarter of the operational fleet. The exchange ratio that had once favored Germany collapsed. Instead of sinking 100,000 tons of shipping for every submarine lost, the ratio fell to 10,000 tons per boat, then lower. The weapon that helped accomplish this reversal was not a torpedo or depth charge. It was a receiver, an antenna array, and an oscilloscope display. High-frequency direction finding, called Huff-Duff by the sailors who operated it, could detect a submarine's radio transmission and display the bearing to that transmission essentially instantaneously. 2 or 3 ships equipped with this technology could triangulate a submarine's position with accuracy sufficient to dispatch aircraft or surface hunters directly to the target area. It is estimated that this technology contributed to 24% of all submarine sinkings during the war. When Kapitänleutnant Sommer took command of his submarine in June 1943, he inherited a vessel and a doctrine shaped by early war successes. The Type 1C was a proven design, displacing over 1,100 tons on the surface and 1,257 tons submerged. At 76 meters in length, the submarine could travel 21,000 nautical miles without refueling, carrying enough provisions for patrols lasting 3 months. The boat mounted 6 torpedo tubes, 4 forward and 2 aft, with storage for 22 torpedoes. A single deck gun and anti-aircraft weapons provided surface armament. The crew numbered 48 men. These were not primitive vessels. German submarine design represented sophisticated engineering, informed by 2 decades of development since the Great War. Each boat featured complex trim systems for precise depth control, demagnetization equipment to protect against magnetic mines, and passive sonar arrays for detecting enemy ships. The diesel engines could propel the submarine at 18 knots on the surface. Submerged, running on electric motors, the boat could maintain 7 knots for extended periods, or sprint at higher speeds for 1 hour before battery depletion forced surfacing. The men who crewed these submarines received extensive training. Sommer himself had completed submarine school, tactical courses, and supervised 2 patrols as executive officer before receiving his own command. His crew drilled constantly on emergency procedures, practiced silent running, studied convoy tactics, and memorized the recognition characteristics of Allied warship classes. They understood their equipment intimately. They knew how to calculate attack angles, how to read sonar contacts, how to interpret the sounds of distant propellers carried through ocean layers. What they did not know, what they could not know in mid-1943, was that their enemy had developed detection capabilities that rendered traditional submarine tactics nearly obsolete. The German Naval Command understood that radio direction finding existed. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had commanded submarines in the previous war and now directed the entire submarine force, knew that transmitting could theoretically reveal position. This awareness had driven the development of the short signal code system designed specifically to minimize transmission time below the threshold required for conventional direction-finding equipment to obtain a bearing. The German assumptions about Allied capabilities were based on technology they themselves possessed. German direction-finding equipment used a system which employed a rotating loop antenna that had to be physically turned until the operator detected a null in the signal strength. This process required time, typically 1 minute or more for an accurate bearing. A transmission lasting 20 seconds would be finished before the operator could complete the measurement. Therefore, logic suggested brief signals offered protection. This calculation was correct regarding the technology Germany knew about. It was catastrophically wrong regarding the technology Britain and America had deployed. By mid-1942, Royal Navy escorts were being equipped with shipboard direction-finding sets that required no mechanical rotation, no manual searching for signal nulls. The British system used an array of fixed antennas connected to a cathode ray oscilloscope display. When a transmission occurred, the display showed the bearing immediately as an elliptical pattern on the screen. An experienced operator could read the bearing in seconds. 2 ships with this equipment could cross-reference their bearings and establish the transmitting submarine's position with useful accuracy. 3 ships could triangulate precisely. The technology had evolved from research conducted in the 1920s by Robert Watson Watt, who had been attempting to develop a system for tracking lightning strikes to provide storm warnings to pilots. His apparatus used a special antenna design. 4 vertical elements arranged in a square pattern which received signals with minimal distortion from ground reflection. Connected to an oscilloscope, this system could display the direction to any electrical discharge instantaneously. Watson Watt's work remained relatively obscure until the late 1930s, when British naval intelligence recognized its potential application against enemy submarines. The first installations appeared on Royal Navy vessels in 1941. Production increased throughout 1942. By June of that year, the United States Navy had begun a program to equip half of all new destroyer escorts with these systems. These installations proliferated rapidly. The shore-based network of direction-finding stations around Britain, Iceland, and North America provided strategic intelligence on submarine movements across the Atlantic. The shipboard systems provided tactical intelligence, allowing convoy escorts to respond immediately to any submarine that transmitted. Within detection range. Admiral Karl Dönitz directed the submarine war from headquarters, outside Paris, with meticulous attention to operational detail. His command style emphasized central control, with submarine commanders required to report their positions, fuel status, torpedo expenditure, and convoy sightings regularly. When a submarine located an Allied convoy, standard procedure required the boat to shadow the formation while transmitting contact reports that would allow Dönitz to concentrate other submarines in the area into a wolf pack for coordinated night surface attacks. This tactical approach had proven devastatingly effective during the early war years. Between 1940 and 1942, coordinated wolfpack operations sank hundreds of Allied merchant ships. The system worked because Dönitz could position his submarines across probable convoy routes, using radio communication to mass forces at the critical point. One submarine would locate the target, others would converge, and the pack would attack together, overwhelming the escorts through superior numbers. The doctrine required radio communication. Without regular position reports, Dönitz could not coordinate operations. Without contact reports, he could not concentrate forces. Without tactical signals, Wolfpack attacks could not be properly sequenced. The entire operational system depended on submarines transmitting from sea. Dönitz understood this created vulnerability, but he believed the short signal system provided adequate protection. The messages were brief. They were encrypted using special machines before transmission. The submarine commanders were instructed to transmit quickly and minimize radiation of signals that might be detected. What Dönitz and his staff did not fully comprehend until too late was that the Allied direction-finding network no longer needed long transmissions to obtain useful bearings. A 20-second signal was more than adequate for operators to establish position. Multiple transmissions over several days created a pattern that convoy routing authorities could use to direct merchant ships away from submarine concentrations. Even a single brief signal could trigger an immediate response from nearby escorts equipped with shipboard direction-finding equipment, bringing destroyers or aircraft to the transmission point within minutes. The German naval staff received warnings. Some submarine commanders returning from patrol reported suspiciously rapid responses from Allied escorts after routine transmissions. Intelligence analysts noted an uncomfortable correlation between radio signals and subsequent attacks. But accepting that the Allies possessed instantaneous direction-finding capability would require abandoning the entire operational doctrine that had achieved success during 1940 through 1942. It would require admitting that the enemy held a decisive technological advantage. It would require fundamentally restructuring submarine tactics away from coordinated Wolfpack operations toward individual patrol. Dönitz resisted this conclusion. In August 1943, after losses had mounted catastrophically during the spring and summer, he issued an order to his submarine commanders attempting to explain the situation. The message acknowledged that the enemy had developed effective methods for locating submarines through their radio transmissions, possibly using long-range reconnaissance aircraft in combination with direction-finding equipment. The order tightened radio discipline further, demanding that commanders transmit only when absolutely necessary, use alternate frequencies when possible, and maintain strict silence during rendezvous operations. But the order could not eliminate radio communication entirely. The operational system still required position reports, weather data, convoy sightings, and tactical coordination. Submarines still needed to receive orders from headquarters. The basic architecture of centralized command and Wolfpack tactics remained unchanged, which meant the vulnerability remained unchanged. The submarines would continue transmitting, and the Allies would continue tracking them with technology the Germans could neither match nor effectively counter. By late 1943, experienced submarine commanders understood they were being hunted through methods they could not see. They knew that transmitting attracted danger. They recognized that Allied escorts responded with uncanny speed and accuracy after radio signals. But they received orders from Dönitz demanding continued operations, continued reporting, continued attempts to locate and attack convoys. The boats sailed, the radios transmitted, and the casualties accumulated at rates that exceeded shipyard production capacity. The faith in brief transmissions, in encrypted signals, in the protection offered by speed and stealth, had been rendered obsolete by a technology few German sailors fully understood. The ocean that had once sheltered submarines had become a surveilled medium where every radio pulse potentially marked position for enemies equipped with instantaneous detection equipment. The transformation was complete, though many submarine crews would not fully comprehend what had changed until they heard the sound of aircraft engines overhead moments after their radio operator finished sending a routine weather report. The encounter that would demonstrate the technology's capabilities to Sommer and his crew occurred on that June morning in 1944, though they would not understand what had happened until much later. At approximately 1100 hours, the submarine surfaced to periscope depth and raised her radio antenna. The radio operator transmitted the scheduled weather report, a short signal of 25 encrypted characters, taking 19 seconds to send. The message contained atmospheric pressure readings, wind direction and speed, sea state, and cloud cover observations required by German meteorological services attempting to predict conditions over the Atlantic. 30 nautical miles away aboard the escort carrier, a high-frequency direction-finding operator watched his oscilloscope display. The moment the submarine's transmission began, an elliptical pattern appeared on his screen. He aligned a cursor with the peaks of the display, noted the bearing, and called it out to the watch officer. 285 degrees. The bearing was immediately plotted on the chart table. Within 90 seconds, 3 aircraft had been launched. The torpedo bombers carried depth charges, acoustic homing torpedoes, and enough fuel for a 4-hour patrol. Sommer ordered the submarine to dive immediately after the transmission finished. Standard procedure. The vessel descended to 70 meters and proceeded at 4 knots, changing course to complicate any pursuit. The crew secured from radio watch and returned to routine patrol operations. They had transmitted for less than 20 seconds. By their understanding of Allied capabilities, this should have provided safety. 10 minutes later, the sonar operator reported distant propeller sounds. Aircraft. Multiple engines. Sommer ordered silent running. All non-essential equipment shut down, movement minimized. The submarine settled to 90 meters. Through the hull, the crew could hear the aircraft circling overhead. The sound of their engines transmitted through the water. The planes remained on station for 3 hours, dropping sonobuoys in a search pattern, waiting for the submarine to surface or make noise that would betray position. Eventually, as fuel ran low, the aircraft departed. The submarine remained submerged for 6 more hours, finally surfacing after dark to recharge batteries and refresh air. Sommer filed a report of the incident upon return to base, noting the unusually rapid aircraft response following routine transmission. His report joined dozens of similar accounts from other commanders. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Something had changed in Allied detection capabilities. The technical specifications of the equipment-hunting submarines represented a generation beyond what German intelligence assessed the Allies possessed. The shipboard direction-finding installation aboard the carrier and her escorts used a system developed by French engineer Henri Bussigny's and refined by American naval laboratories. The receiver could detect radio transmissions across the high-frequency band from 3 to 30 MHz. The antenna array, mounted on a rotating platform for calibration purposes, but requiring no rotation during operation, fed signals to a cathode ray oscilloscope display with a circular screen approximately 12 centimeters in diameter. When a transmission occurred anywhere within several hundred kilometers, assuming line-of-sight radio propagation, the display showed an elliptical pattern oriented along the bearing to the signal source. An experienced operator trained in a 3-week course that covered radio theory, antenna characteristics, signal propagation, and practical exercises could read the bearing within 5 seconds of signal detection. The accuracy ranged from 2 to 5 degrees, depending on signal strength and atmospheric conditions. Multiple ships obtaining cross bearings could establish position within a circle approximately 15 to 30 kilometers in diameter, sufficient to guide aircraft or surface hunters to the target area. By June 1944, approximately 200 Allied warships carried this equipment. The shore-based network consisted of more than 50 stations around the Atlantic perimeter, from Iceland through Britain to Gibraltar and across to Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean. These installations formed an integrated detection grid managed from operational intelligence centers in London and Washington. Every submarine transmission was logged, plotted, and analyzed. Patterns of movement could be tracked. Concentrations of submarines could be identified. Convoys could be routed away from danger areas. The disparity between German assumptions and Allied capabilities had become absolute by mid-1943. Submarine commanders believed 20-second transmissions offered protection. In reality, those transmissions were completely transparent to direction-finding networks. Submarines assumed they could transit areas undetected if they maintained radio silence. In reality, they were tracked continuously through regular position reports required by Dönitz's command system. The operational doctrine designed to maximize effectiveness through coordination had become a vulnerability that Allied intelligence exploited systematically. Statistical analysis revealed the transformation. Between July 1942 and May 1943, Allied direction-finding networks managed to divert 105 out of 174 North Atlantic convoys away from Wolfpack ambushes. Another 23 convoys partially avoided contact. The majority of convoys that successfully evaded submarine concentrations did so because direction-finding intelligence provided advanced warning of submarine positions. Merchant ship losses declined. Submarine losses increased. The exchange ratio shifted decisively against Germany. The psychological impact of this technology emerged gradually among submarine crews through accumulated experience rather than single revelations. Commanders returning from patrol would gather in officers' quarters at bases in France and Norway, speaking quietly about encounters that defied explanation. Aircraft appearing from clear skies within minutes of surfacing. escorts that changed course directly toward their position after transmitting convoy contact reports. Depth charge attacks that began impossibly soon after sending routine signals to headquarters. One captain, commanding a submarine during May 1943, recorded in his patrol log that Allied escorts responded to his position with uncanny accuracy following weather transmissions. He noted that aircraft seemed to know his location, despite maintaining proper radio discipline and keeping signals brief. After losing contact with a convoy he had been shadowing, he wrote that he suspected the enemy possessed detection methods beyond his understanding. Similar observations filled patrol reports throughout. The spring and summer of 1943, another captain experienced the technology's capabilities during a patrol in March 1943. His boat had located a convoy and transmitted a contact report to headquarters. Within 40 minutes, 3 destroyers appeared over the horizon, moving directly toward the submarine's position. The captain crash-dived and evaded the initial attack, but the escorts remained overhead for 8 hours, conducting systematic depth charge patterns that forced the submarine to remain deep until battery power reached critical levels. Upon surfacing that night, he transmitted a situation report. Aircraft arrived within 20 minutes. The pattern repeated 3 times over the next 2 days. The technological asymmetry manifested in ways that German sailors found deeply unsettling. Submarine crews had been trained to believe their vessels offered invisibility beneath the waves. They understood that surface detection was possible, that lookouts or radar might spot a conning tower, but they had been taught that diving provided sanctuary, that brief transmissions offered security, that the ocean's vastness guaranteed concealment. Each of these assumptions was being systematically dismantled by technologies they could not see, could not fight, and frequently could not even comprehend. The British and American anti-submarine campaign had evolved into an integrated system combining multiple detection methods. Direction finding provided initial contact and bearing. Radar allowed aircraft to locate surface submarines at night or in poor visibility. Sonar detected submerged boats. Acoustic homing torpedoes pursued submarines autonomously once launched. Hunter-killer groups combined escort carriers with destroyer escorts, providing both air and surface pursuit capabilities that could track submarines continuously from first detection through final attack. German countermeasures proved inadequate. The radar detector introduced in August 1942 could identify Allied radar transmissions in the meter wave band, but was blind to the new centimetric radar operating at 10 centimeter wavelength. Submarines equipped with the detector believed they had warning of air attack. In reality, they detected only older radar sets, while remaining vulnerable to the newer systems carried by increasing numbers of aircraft. When a captured Royal Air Force pilot suggested during interrogation that British forces were homing in on the detector emissions themselves, Dönitz ordered the system discontinued in August 1943. This decision eliminated what little radar warning capability German submarines possessed. Attempts to minimize radio transmission through stricter discipline provided limited benefit. The operational system still required communication. Submarines needed to receive orders, report positions, transmit convoy sightings, and coordinate with other boats during wolf-pack operations. Even submarines that maintained near-complete radio silence had to surface periodically to recharge batteries, and Allied patrol aircraft now carried sufficient radar to detect surfaced boats at ranges beyond visual detection. The technological advantage had shifted so completely that traditional submarine operations became nearly impossible in contested waters. The moment of recognition for many submarine commanders came not through a single dramatic encounter, but through the mathematical reality of survival rates. In May 1943, 41 submarines were lost from an operational fleet of approximately 160 boats. This represented a loss rate of 26% in a single month. The previous monthly record had been 18 boats lost in November 1942. Suddenly, losses had more than doubled. More submarines were being destroyed than German shipyards could produce. The casualty figures became impossible to ignore. Of the 1,156 submarines commissioned during the war, 785 were lost to enemy action or accidents. 32,000 submariners served in the submarine force. 28,000 died. This represented a casualty rate of approximately 87%, the highest of any major service branch in any belligerent nation during the war. By comparison, German infantry formations on the Eastern Front, engaged in the most brutal ground fighting of the war, sustained casualty rates averaging 40 to 60% over sustained periods. These statistics filtered through the submarine force gradually. The German naval command attempted to maintain operational security by segregating information between flotillas. Crews returning from patrol were not informed of losses in other units. Official announcements minimized casualties, but submariners talked. Men on leave visited other bases. Boats that should have returned from patrol simply vanished. The number of familiar faces decreased. With each passing month, one senior officer who commanded all submarines based in France later recalled the psychological impact of mounting losses during testimony after the war. He described the period after May 1943 as marked by declining morale, as crews recognized their chances of survival had become minimal. Young submariners reported for duty, knowing the statistical likelihood suggested they would not return from patrol. Experienced commanders requested transfer to training commands or administrative positions. The submarine service, which had been an elite assignment earlier in the war, became a death sentence. The technological explanation for these losses remained partially obscured to German sailors throughout the war. Dönitz and his staff suspected that Allied direction-finding capabilities had improved significantly. Intelligence reports indicated that shipboard detection equipment had been widely deployed. Some commanders speculated about new types of radar. Others believed that encryption had been compromised, though this possibility was officially denied. The full scope of Allied technological advantage, combining direction finding, centimetric radar, improved sonar, acoustic torpedoes, and signals intelligence from decrypted messages, was not understood until after Germany's surrender. What submarine crews did understand was that their training, their equipment, and their tactical doctrine had become inadequate against enemies who seemed to possess impossible capabilities. Submarines that attempted to shadow convoys found themselves hunted instead of hunting. Boats that transmitted routine reports attracted aircraft and surface ships with alarming speed. The ocean, which had once provided concealment and opportunity, had become a surveilled medium where every radio signal potentially marked position and every surfacing risked immediate attack. 1. Commander captured this recognition in a report filed after a patrol in April 1943. He noted that Allied escorts responded to his submarines' presence with detection methods he could neither identify nor evade. He described being tracked continuously for more than 30 hours, despite multiple course changes and depth variations. He concluded that the enemy possessed technical capabilities far exceeding German intelligence estimates and recommended fundamental revision of submarine tactics away from coordinated operations toward individual patrol. His recommendation was noted but not implemented. The operational system remained unchanged. The submarines continued sailing, transmitting, and dying at rates that exceeded replacement capacity. By autumn 1943, Germany had effectively lost the Battle of the Atlantic. Though combat operations would continue through the war's end, the strategic initiative had passed irreversibly to the Allies. Kapitänleutnant Helmut Sommer and the crew of his submarine never fully understood the technology that hunted them during their weather reporting patrol in June 1944. After the encounter with aircraft from the carrier on the 17th, the submarine continued operations for another 8 days. On June 25th, Sommer attempted to attack a troop transport loaded with American soldiers bound for Britain. The submarine submerged to attack position, but was outrun by the much faster liner. As the submarine surfaced in the transport's wake, she was attacked by aircraft from British merchant carriers. The submarine survived that engagement with minor damage. The final encounter occurred after 10 days of relentless pursuit. Direction-finding equipment aboard the carrier detected another weather report transmission from the submarine at a range of 30 nautical miles. The escort carrier's crew had nicknamed their elusive target Moby Dick. After nearly 2 weeks of hunting, aircraft launched immediately this time, arriving overhead before the submarine could dive to safe depth. Depth charges and acoustic homing torpedoes bracketed the boat. The submarine attempted evasive maneuvers, diving deep, changing course repeatedly, rigging for silent running. The attacks continued for 6 hours. The submarine's luck ended when coordinated attacks from multiple aircraft finally breached the pressure hull. She sank in deep water west of the Azores. All 48 crew members died. Sommer was 28 years old. The submarine had been operational for exactly 1 year. She had completed 1 war patrol. The official German casualty report listed the boat as missing, presumed lost with all hands. The exact circumstances of her destruction would not be confirmed until post-war analysis of Allied records. The broader pattern of submarine losses continued through the final year of the war. Between June 1944 and May 1945, German submarines sank approximately 150 Allied merchant ships. During the same period, 192 submarines were destroyed. The exchange ratio had inverted completely from the early war years, when submarines sank multiple ships for each boat lost. Now submarines were being destroyed faster than they could inflict damage on Allied shipping. Units attempted to salvage the submarine campaign through technological innovation. A revolutionary new submarine design was introduced in late 1944. These boats were true submarines rather than submersibles, designed to operate primarily underwater. They featured streamlined hulls, enormous battery capacity, allowing sustained high-speed submerged running, and snorkel systems permitting battery recharging without fully surfacing. Most importantly, they were designed to minimize radio transmissions through increased operational autonomy. The new design arrived too late. Production difficulties, Allied bombing of manufacturing facilities, and the general collapse of German industrial capacity limited deployment. Only 2 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender. Even had these advanced submarines been available in larger numbers, they could not have reversed the strategic situation. The Battle of the Atlantic had been decided by mid-1943. The new design represented German recognition that previous submarines and tactics had become obsolete. But that recognition came after the war was already lost. The human cost of this technological asymmetry remained staggering through the war's end. Of the 1,156 submarines commissioned, 785 were lost. The survivors surrendered in May 1945 following Germany's capitulation. Many boats received coded orders directing them to scuttle rather than surrender. Approximately 220 submarines were deliberately sunk by their crews during the final weeks of the war. The remainder sailed to Allied ports and were eventually scrapped or used for technical evaluation. The submariners who survived faced complex psychological aftermath. They had served in a branch that suffered the highest casualty rate of any major military formation during the war. They had witnessed friends and shipmates die at rates that exceeded even the most brutal ground combat. Many struggled with survivors' guilt, questioning why they had lived when so many others perished. Some maintained pride in their service despite Germany's defeat, viewing submarine duty as honorable warfare against military targets rather than participation in the regime's criminal enterprises. Post-war interrogations of senior submarine officers revealed the extent to which German command had underestimated Allied technological capabilities. When asked about direction finding, most commanders acknowledged suspecting some form of improved detection existed, but expressed surprise at learning the system could detect signals essentially instantaneously. One officer, interviewed by Allied intelligence in 1945, stated that submarine command had believed brief transmissions provided adequate security until accumulated losses forced recognition that enemy capabilities exceeded German assumptions. He noted that this realization came gradually through patrol reports, rather than through any single intelligence breakthrough. The technology gap extended beyond direction finding. German submarines never developed effective radar warning receivers that could detect centimetric radar. They never matched Allied sonar performance. They never deployed acoustic homing torpedoes comparable to American weapons. They never established an intelligence network capable of breaking Allied naval codes the way British codebreakers penetrated German encryption. The cumulative technological disadvantage, combined with Allied superiority in shipbuilding capacity and pilot training, created an insurmountable strategic situation that no amount of courage or tactical skill could overcome. The legacy of direction-finding technology extended far beyond World War II. The fundamental principle of using radio emissions to locate transmitting sources became a permanent fixture of naval warfare and signals intelligence. During the Cold War, both NATO and Warsaw Pact navies maintained extensive direction-finding networks to track submarine movements. The technology evolved from manual oscilloscope displays to computerized systems capable of processing multiple signals simultaneously across broad frequency ranges. Modern electronic warfare suites incorporate direction finding as a basic capability integrated with radar, sonar, and communications intelligence systems. The lessons learned from the Battle of the Atlantic shaped post-war submarine development. The Soviet Union, which captured German advanced submarine designs and documentation at the war's end, built its submarine fleet around principles demonstrated by late-war German boats. The emphasis shifted toward true submarines capable of sustained underwater operations, minimizing time spent on the surface where they were vulnerable to radar and visual detection. Nuclear propulsion, introduced in the 1950s, finally achieved the operational capability German designers had attempted to approximate through large battery banks and snorkel systems. The United States Navy absorbed technological and tactical lessons from both its own anti-submarine campaign and from captured German equipment. Post-war submarine design emphasized underwater performance, sound quieting to minimize sonar detection, and operational autonomy to reduce communication requirements. American submarines of the Cold War era were designed specifically to counter the direction finding and sonar networks that had proven so effective against German submarines. The cycle of detection technology versus stealth technology that characterized the Battle of the Atlantic continued throughout the Cold War and into the modern era. The psychological impact on German naval culture proved profound and lasting. The Federal Republic of Germany's Navy, established in 1956, approached submarine operations with institutional memory of the heavy casualties suffered during World War II. Training emphasized caution, technological proficiency, and integration with Allied forces, rather than the aggressive independent operations that had characterized the earlier submarine force. Former German submariners who joined the new Navy brought with them hard-learned lessons about the dangers of underestimating enemy capabilities and the cost of inadequate technology. Several submarine commanders who survived the war wrote memoirs detailing their experiences. These accounts consistently emphasized the psychological difficulty of operating in an environment where the enemy seemed to possess uncanny knowledge of submarine positions. One of Germany's most decorated submarine commanders, who survived the war, wrote that the period after May 1943 felt like sailing into a trap every time they left port. He described the constant stress of wondering whether the next transmission would bring aircraft overhead, whether surfacing to recharge batteries would result in radar detection, whether even routine operations might prove fatal. The statistical analysis of submarine operations conducted after the war by both German and Allied researchers confirmed that direction finding played a decisive role in Allied victory. The correlation between radio transmissions and subsequent attacks was overwhelming. Submarines that maintained strict radio silence survived significantly longer than boats that transmitted regularly. But maintaining complete radio silence while conducting offensive operations against convoys proved impossible given German tactical doctrine. The operational system Dönitz had developed, which depended on centralized control and coordination through radio communication, contained the seeds of its own failure once the Allies deployed instantaneous direction-finding technology. The broader strategic implications extended beyond submarine warfare. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated that technological superiority combined with superior industrial production could overcome initial operational advantages. Germany entered the war with experienced submarine crews, proven tactics, and reasonable equipment. Within 4 years, Allied technological development and industrial mobilization had rendered German submarines obsolete and extremely vulnerable. This pattern repeated across multiple domains. German tank designs that dominated in 1940 were obsolete by 1943. Air Force aircraft that achieved air superiority over Poland and France were outclassed by 1944. The surface fleet became irrelevant once Allied naval production reached full capacity. The submarine campaign represented Germany's most dangerous threat to Allied victory. If submarine warfare had succeeded in cutting the Atlantic supply lines, Britain might have been starved into surrender, and the Allied invasion of Europe rendered impossible. The margin by which this threat was defeated remained narrow through early 1943. Technologies like direction finding, combined with increased escort production, improved air coverage, and signals intelligence from decrypted messages, tipped the balance decisively. The compound effect of multiple Allied advantages overwhelmed German capabilities despite individual acts of courage and tactical skill by submarine crews. The story of German submarines and direction finding represents a pattern repeated throughout military history. Technological advantage, once established, proves extremely difficult to overcome through operational skill alone. The German submariners who sailed against Atlantic convoys in 1943 and 1944 were not less capable than their predecessors who achieved success during earlier years. Their training was thorough, their equipment functional, their courage unquestioned. What changed was the technological environment in which they operated. The gap between German assumptions and Allied capabilities created a psychological dissonance that many submarine commanders struggled to reconcile. They had been taught that brief transmissions offered security. Experience demonstrated that any transmission attracted danger. They believed the ocean's vastness provided concealment. Reality showed them being tracked continuously across thousands of miles. They trusted that diving provided sanctuary. Allied sonar and acoustic torpedoes proved otherwise. Each assumption, carefully taught during training and reinforced by early war success, collapsed under the weight of technological change. The moment Captain-Lieutenant Sommer authorized that weather transmission on June 17, 1944, he acted according to doctrine developed through years of experience. The transmission lasted 19 seconds. The short signal code reduced message length to minimum necessary characters. The radio operator executed the procedure flawlessly. Every precaution within German understanding had been followed. None of it mattered. The direction-finding operator aboard the carrier obtained a bearing in seconds. Aircraft launched within minutes. The hunt that would end 10 days later began with a technology Sommer could not see, could not fight, and only dimly understood existed. This pattern of technological surprise and belated recognition shaped the entire Battle of the Atlantic. German Naval Command knew direction finding existed but underestimated its capabilities. They suspected radar had improved but failed to develop adequate countermeasures. They believed their encryption was secure despite mounting evidence suggesting otherwise. Each miscalculation contributed to mounting casualties that eventually made submarine operations unsustainable. The submariners paid the price for these institutional failures with their lives. The broader lesson extends beyond submarine warfare or even World War II. Military forces that fail to accurately assess enemy capabilities, that continue operating on obsolete assumptions, that cannot adapt to technological change, will suffer catastrophic losses regardless of individual competence or courage. The German submarine force of 1943 through 1945 demonstrated this principle with mathematical precision. 87% casualties, 785 boats lost, 28,000 men dead. These numbers represent not merely tactical defeats but strategic failure rooted in technological and institutional blindness. The Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic required more than just direction finding. It required the integration of multiple technologies: radar, sonar, acoustic torpedoes, signals intelligence, into coherent operational systems. It required massive industrial production to build sufficient escort ships and aircraft. It required training thousands of operators and maintainers for complex electronic equipment. It required institutional flexibility to adopt new tactics as technology evolved. Most critically, it required accurate assessment of both friendly and enemy capabilities, avoiding the comfortable assumptions that led German command to underestimate Allied technical development. For the men who served in submarines during the final years of the war, these strategic considerations offered little comfort. They knew only that their chances of survival decreased with each passing month, that operations which should have succeeded ended in death, that the ocean which once sheltered them had become hostile territory. They transmitted brief signals as ordered and died when aircraft arrived impossibly fast. They maintained radio discipline and died when escorts appeared from over the horizon. They followed doctrine faithfully and died because that doctrine had become obsolete. The direction-finding technology that helped doom the submarine force represented a modest innovation in radio detection, developed originally for tracking lightning, adapted for military intelligence, deployed widely through Allied navies. It was not a wonder weapon. It did not guarantee victory in any single engagement,